Step into the realm of limitless imagination with Beyond the Art, where Indigenous creativity knows no bounds. Join us on a captivating journey through Indigenous art and innovation.
Together, let's delve into the depths of imagination, pushing boundaries with guests from diverse sectors of the Native American art world, each sharing their unique creative vision and inspiring journeys.
Join us for exclusive interviews, thought-provoking discussions, and uplifting stories. Well, welcome to Beyond the Art, and today we have as our guest, Josue Rivas. Welcome to the show.
Hi there, how are you today?
Good. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into it and ask you to share with us your journey into becoming an Indigenous futurist and how you integrate your art, technology, and journalism and decolonization into your work.
Thank you. My name is Josue Rivas. I am Mexica, Nahua, and also Otomi from Mexico City and from Guanajuato, Mexico. And yeah, it's an honor to be here today and share a bit about this work and the things that the questions we're trying to answer with a lot of the storytelling. My body of work and my intention really for being a practitioner, right, to have a creative practice. That's what I call myself now. Because going through the realization that you're not just an artist, but that the art can also be practiced and be useful for humanity and for people that come in the journey is really important. So as a practitioner, having a creative practice, the foundation of it has always been, without knowing and now knowing, it's how can we allow people to transform by telling their own story.
I mean, you do quite a lot. How do you juggle all the information that comes to you that you want to project outward? What's your process?
Yeah, usually there's always a lot of intention to understand that the things that I do have ripples, right? So for me, whenever, for example, there is a project or there's an idea that it's in front of me, I always ask myself the question, who are you doing this for? And why are you doing this, right? So that if the answers are, this is for a corporation or this is for the status quo, or if there's no real understanding of how the project will come into fruition through community, then I usually just kind of step away from that, or maybe put it in the back just to kind of focus more on what's necessary. Which is quite difficult, obviously, living in a society that requires you to make sure you're financially always contributing, right, and always being
correct.
So I think balance has been a key part of the creative practice too, is to be able to have a process that and then values that continue to grow and evolve, but they never compromise.
Right. So in what ways do you challenge the mainstream narrative about Indigenous peoples through your creative projects and storytelling?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of value in allowing Indigenous peoples to tell their own story, right? So
absolutely, yeah.
That doesn't mean that it shouldn't be any other person telling the story. I think that there's a very big misunderstanding in that sometimes, where people say, "Hey, we want to be able to tell our own story," but it's not saying, and you shouldn't tell the story either. It's more saying,
right,
we need to balance it, right? We grew in a society where watching Peter Pan, or even going to watching Pocahontas, or even going to a museum, and then you see all this storytelling, but there's no Indigenous voices that were either in the production of that storytelling or guiding the story. And oftentimes it's actually extractive, right? So instead of regenerating the consciousness of, for example, in this case, mainstream society and the consciousness of Indigenous communities, we sometimes blur it and almost make it a little bit more muddy. So by Indigenous people telling their own stories, there is a value for society and it's a currency for society, but also it creates a more accurate and contemporary narrative too, because a lot of people might believe that that just because you're Indigenous, you have you're living in a way that your ancestors lived as, and for the most part throughout the world, there's very limited amount of intact tribes and communities, because we all kind of have to assimilate for the most part forcefully. So for me, for us to tell the story is really bringing that balance, and then it's creating a currency, right? So if you tell somebody, hey, I think I see you this way, but tell me about your community, you tell me what it is, and maybe let's collaborate on it, right? Then it creates a currency about that community, and also creates a currency for people that will never meet. And I think that's the futurist part, quote unquote, of the practice, is that it's okay to do things now that you might not be able to see the results of.
Right.
And that's I think that's also important in the process of us telling our own story.
Well, how do you navigate the complexities of co-creating with indigenous communities while respecting their cultural heritage and sovereignty?
I think uh, always being very mindful that you're someone's guest is really important. So whenever, you know coming from a place where I growing up, I saw the collaboration amongst our own communities, right?
Mhm.
And then also being able to see how, for example, when you go to another place like the United States, there's certain protocols that each community has. And when you walk in and you say, hey, I want to create something with you, or have this idea, there's always the process in the protocol where you just kind of listen, and you deeply listen, and then you might do things a certain way in your community, but here they do it like this. um,
Right.
so understanding that and being okay with that, it's really important. I think that, um, from my experience, whenever somebody tries to force their own point of view into a community, then that not only does that maybe not work, but also it could impact the perception of that community and the perception of the work that they're doing together. So being able to have uh, a set of guidelines for myself, for my team, to always listen, and then to always remember that collaboration, it's, you're weaving,
Mhm.
you're weaving
True.
together. So sometimes you might have to pause and say, hey, we need to come back a little bit, we need to unweave this a bit, and then come back and weave it again. That's also really important. So that process of collaboration, it's actually the one of the main things that the are part of my creative practice right now. It's learning how collaboration is going to be the future of humanity, but also the future of storytelling.
So tell me a little bit about a project that you feel exemplifies your vision of transformation and collective healing through storytelling and art.
Well, recently I just did this project called Standing Strong. Standing Strong is a long-term project, so I've been working on this since 2016, end of 2016, after the opposition to the Dakota Access Pipeline, where I lived at Standing Rock for about 7 months. So during that process, I learned that foundation of this work was going to be collaboration, community guided collaboration, but then also public art, right? Like
Mhm.
how do we get out of the phone screen, or how do we get out of the, you know, having access to a fine art print, right? So like what we did here is, how do public art has to be at the forefront of this. Also, people telling their own stories has to be at the forefront of this. And then also, we have to make sure that we find grounds for people to process and transform things, um,
Right.
so Standing Strong, version 3, or chapter 3, it's the manifestation of one, a person telling their own story. Her name is Akosia Red Elk. She's from the Umatia tribe. So she told her own story in 1 minute, and then we animated that, and then we made that into an augmented reality project that you can scan a code, and the photograph will come to life, right? Um, so it was really important for us to incorporate not only the voice, not only the visuals, but also, to a certain degree, and this is something maybe controversial in a lot of mainstream realms, but there is the spiritual component of it, where
Mhm.
um, where that person, Akosia, is a good friend of mine. She was able to process something that maybe she wouldn't have processed through this way, like through a to a photograph. Maybe she would have gone dancing, or she would have, gone to do ceremony back home. Where it's these things that we carry, that when we let go of that weight, it allows us to see ourselves, right? And that's to me, that's the what I'm trying to answer with a lot of this work is, how can we see ourselves and love ourselves? Like, how can we being okay with being us, and not having to
True.
compromise who we are just because of a system.
Hmm. Or compromise ourselves to fit someone else's narrative.
Hmm. Hmm.
What role do you see technology playing in amplifying Indigenous voices and narratives, and how do you incorporate it into your own work?
Yeah, I think technology is a tool, right? So
Hmm.
the same way that we're using, a platform right now that somebody came up with and say, hey, we'll be really smart if we, make a platform where people can actually record the podcast remotely.
Right.
I mean, this is indigenous futurism right here. You know what I mean?
True. Yeah.
So the tool, the tool will be the tool, but in my opinion, the intention and almost hmm, I don't want to say caution, because I don't think we have to be afraid. We have to be curious about these technologies. But I think that there is a world when we combine ancestral knowledge and technology, and by that I mean we're already living in it. We're post-apocalyptic
True.
peoples, right? We already went through the
Hmm.
apocalypse, right? So like it's really interesting how yeah, I can speak for some for my own culture, and from my own community, that you know, for example, with my community where we dance, we just communicate over Facebook a lot of the times. Like I have to log into my Facebook in order to talk to this one person that we go to ceremony with, or what I mean.
Right.
And
Right.
sometimes I think, oh man, I really don't want to be on Facebook, but somehow the tool becomes the portal for us to be able to communicate. And I really think that these technologies that are arising, everything from AI to to augmented reality, for example, with the Vision Pro, and a lot of these different things that are gonna become very normalized, like just like
Hmm.
just like when the iPhone came out, nobody thought, oh yeah, we're all gonna have an iPhone at some point and walk around with it.
Right.
um, we're living through that time where these technologies, I think, that we're entering into required us to remember our ancestral knowledge, so that we don't get caught up in the illusion of what that is. It
Right.
really is an
Absolutely.
illusion. It's a, I mean, the illusion that you can create anything out of a prompt. You know what I mean? Like, it gives everyone the illusion that we have access to be creators without knowing that we're already creators.
Right. Right.
You don't have to be great at prompting uh, ChatGPT in order to create. You know, and I think, and our grandmas and grandpas taught us that. There was. I remember I was talking to my mom this week, and it was my birthday on Saturday actually, and
Well, happy belated birthday.
she was saying, your grandma. We were just going through some very beautiful, deep, like undoing, right, untying the knots, untying the braid, and then she was telling me, how my grandma never hugged her. She was It was very hard for her to show love because of her generation, and
Right.
back in Mexico, folks were not necessarily only put in boarding schools, but there was the Catholic Church was the boarding school. Um,
Hmm.
anyway, so she was sharing that it was really difficult for her to show affection to people. However, she said, I never saw her cry ever in my life. Only when her milpa, which a milpa is corn, is the three sisters, is corn, squash, and beans.
Hmm.
Her milpa, um, her milpa was run down by water from the storm. That's the only time I saw her cried. And then she said it because to her, like that was her technology, right? Like that was her, being able to grow things such big as corn was something that she saw as something that was very advanced, and she will share that with us. We'll make tortillas together, we'll create with things. And to me, those ancestral quote unquote technologies are so important, because when you when you put a corn field against a database of AI generated prompts,
Hmm.
it, the corn has so much more knowledge that we don't even quite understand, that we think, no, this is civilization right here, but in reality civilization, or civil, right, whatever that means, um, cohesive was with the corn. So I think that we're gonna have to remember who we are deeply in order to not get caught up in the technology.
Correct, correct. Or over inundated, I guess, that we go back to the basics because that is technology and that's part of our heart and soul as a human being as
Hmm.
well. How do you approach the process of decolonization within your creative endeavors?
Hmm.
And what strategies do you employ to dismantle colonial frameworks and perspectives?
Mm. I think when I started this work, well, this work started for me early on um, when I grew up with a father who was also a photographer, right? So there was a lot of I saw a lot through
Mhm.
what happens when you pull out a camera. It was really interesting. I also hated photography because of my father. So my father was deeply addicted to alcohol. So I actually grew up hating this portal, this tool, right? This idea of photography, and not until there was a healing process around 21 years old did I realize that a lot of the work that I had to do with processing processing the intergenerational wounds, and healing them, transforming them,
Mhm.
and then but then what happened is, so I went through this journey, and then Standing Rock happened, right? You heard about Standing Rock, right?
Oh yeah.
So of course will, but and what I mean with that is, like, when that happened, I think that I got really angry. There was this kind of like, I'm gonna use photography, I'm gonna use these stories to fight back against the system, right? That was kind of that was where I was, and I was much younger. And I remember there was an um, auntie Pua, who was from Hawaii, and she told me, Josue, we were out there Standing Rock, and it's a late night, and we're at the fire. She's like, Josue, the real front lines are at home, you know, like where is your kid right now? Where is where
Mhm.
is your where is your partner? Where's what are you doing right here? Why aren't you home right now? And then
Right.
and then I think that decolonizing also means, one, loving yourselves, really understanding what self-love means. Like, how do you not feel bad about yourself after you watch a movie or after you watch a commercial? You know what I mean? Like, how do you stay intact as much as you possibly can and rooted in whatever drives you? That can be something bigger than yourself, or that can be your family, or whatever it is. And then two, how can we how can we find a collective vibration that allows for that self love to be at the forefront? And that is decolonizing, right? So when you
Correct. Yeah.
when you love yourself, sometimes you're harder to control. You know, when you when you
Mhm.
when you have self worth, or you see yourself as something that is valuable and that is worthy of, then people will have a harder time telling you a narrative. So
True.
so for me, decolonizing through visual storytelling means having a sensitivity, and not being afraid to show my sensitivity, so that I can also show my descendants and really do the work for the descendants that I'll never meet, that I try to heal, that I try for my generation to heal, so that we can set up a better situation for them.
Mhm. Very true. So, how, as a visual storyteller, what are some of the unique challenges and opportunities you encounter in conveying Indigenous stories and experiences through your imagery?
I Going back to that part about my father, I always saw my dad give away his work. And I really didn't understand that. I remember clearly creating a lot of conflict with my mother, because he he will give away the work, he will give away the money that we were gonna bring. Um, and then again, I didn't realize until later on when I went through my own healing journey with him that when you give it away, he actually he actually does something much bigger than what you understand. When you give things away, it just goes into the yeah, it goes into the channels, and then it does it,
Hmm.
and it'll probably come back to you at some point. Um, so visual storytelling, it's a portal. When you're photographing, or you're making a film, or maybe you're creating an illustration, or even creating a augmented reality piece. What
Hmm.
you're doing, you're opening these portals, these like little windows, and through these windows, actually circular windows, but through these little windows, you're able to see beyond what other people might see, and also maybe through your own perspective. And I think that for me personally, the best visual storytellers that I ever met, not best, but the ones that I admire the most, have always been conduits for something bigger than themselves, right? So it's them. They're telling
True.
you what it is, but they're
Right.
also able to transfer something that is outside of themselves a bit, um,
Hmm.
that they reconcile and weave for it to be one. And so I think visual storytelling is very much about being a conduit.
So we briefly touched upon your process. So when you start creating your work, is there a format for which you start creating and something you want to be told or represented?
Mm, yes and no. It's actually I'm a Pisces, so I don't know if that makes any sense, but I'm super flowy, right? I I don't I don't
You just go with the flow.
I go with the flow, and then I also it's a you can't force creativity, you can't force a story.
Hmm.
That's almost kind of why I think me doing this as a job or doing this as a practice is so important for me, because it helps me to be in the moment. I'm a person that is it's in the moment so much, but yeah, I am still thinking about like five other things at the same time. So visual storytelling as a yeah, it's a medium, which is kind of interesting that people call it a medium, right? Because it's in the middle,
Hmm.
right? It's like this is what I'm talking about, being a conduit. That's why they call them mediums, because you're in the middle of two worlds. And I think
Right,
that
right.
yeah, being a visual storyteller also means, in the process of it, to have intention, and then also being okay with that intention and that vision that you have to evolve. Specifically if you're working with teams, right? So if
Hmm.
it's just me in my studio, making a painting, or in my case, making a photograph, and it's just me, and the agreements with the collaborators are different, that they're not, it's just for us, then it's one thing. But if, for example, we're making something for a client who, the stakes are very high for them, they're spending a lot of money in this logo, let's say, right? They really want to rebrand. Then you're dealing with having to be a team leader, and I think that process itself is much more complicated, but much more gratifying when you're able to guide teams, and you're able to guide like other people to bring to life those things that you need to make. And for the last 5 years, I've been doing that. um, Slowly but surely, we're building still a cohesive process for us to be able to make, and then eventually give it away, right? To say, hey, look,
Hmm.
this is how I made my company, this is what has worked, this is what hasn't worked, here's the blueprint, this is what we think we have new currencies coming up. I think we're going to go away from thinking that dollars are the only currency, and then start thinking about just deeply how community is a currency, how having a creative practice is a currency, how loving yourself is a currency, right? Self-esteem, like literally that is a
True.
currency. So anyway, so the processes are very much rooted in intention, collaboration, and then also being able to find the right people to work with.
So when you start creating your work and you have something in mind that you want to start to portray and tell the story, once you start gathering the emphasis of what you're trying to tell, does it take its own life, or do you stay on the same path of telling that story?
So another role, I guess you can say that I play, actually probably 90% of the time, is actually creative director. So I'm the creative director for our agency, and yeah, I think that what that teaches me is having, having the structure built enough that we can
Mhm.
play in the structure, you know um because creativity, especially when you have an idea, let's say, right now me and you came up with an idea, for it to come from an idea to becoming a reality, it's there's so many factors that will play, have to take place. But also, if you know that there is no, I remember Rick Rubin saying this. Rick Rubin is one, it's a producer, creative guide. He's saying something along the lines that when you have an offering, you make something as an offering to something much bigger than yourself. There's no
Mhm.
wrong way to do it, right? um,
True.
so having the structure allows us to find the multiple ways that we can make that offering without having to, yeah, to never deliver it, or never make it because we forgot about it, like
Mhm.
I'm interestingly enough, I can be in the clouds heavily and also be heavily grounded at the same time. So it's like a little bit of a blessing sometimes, and sometimes a curse, because we're like, I thought this was happening today. What's happening right now? But I think that that's also where I find that I surround myself around people that are okay with, yeah, we just have going in a flow that really allows for regeneration instead of extraction. Because think about this, people call it a deadline, right? But
Right.
nobody really dies in a deadline,
Right.
right? But yeah, we
True,
we
true.
we have this very uh, very linear um, structures that I think the future of humanity is going to be more fluid.
True. How do you envision the future of Indigenous representation in media and the arts, and what steps can be taken to ensure that Indigenous voices are authentically represented and empowered?
I think we're in a really interesting time because we are we are probably months or maybe years away from having an awakening around why it's so important to heal our relationships with indigenous peoples in this country and around the world.
Mhm.
um, I think that when we incorporate indigenous knowledge and indigenous voices into media, into specifically mainstream media, because the the impact that will have for generations is going to be so big that we actually don't even quite understand how deep it can go at this point, because we will be healing intergenerational wounds. and
Mhm.
and that's something that, working with a few projects with boarding school survivors, I learned so much of how important it is for them to share about their what they went through, not because they want to change it a lot of the times, but because there's also a need to speak about it. The if we can allow for mainstream culture to understand that there is wounds in this country around the way that we treated indigenous peoples, then hopefully we find a path for mutual understanding, but then also for transformation,
Mhm.
for that to happen. So right now, as we are entering a place where there's TV shows, there's many different things that are happening in society that are included indigenous peoples and indigenous storytellers. My hope is that the next year to a few years, we have a much more comprehensive inclusion and representation, and then also that maybe it's okay to get out of the form, get out of the
Hmm.
cycle, and maybe make your own thing, kind of stuff like this, where you're telling these stories in a way that that is independent to a certain degree as well.
Let's go into the sources to hear their journeys, their voices, their stories, so that it's more connected to what they do in the Native American Indigenous art world. So, again, thank you for coming on the show. Can you share any insights or lessons you've learned from collaborating with Indigenous communities that have significantly influenced your approach to your work?
Yes, when I work on this project recently, the Standing Strong project, and um, yeah, the way sometimes that it works is you can work collectively with a community, or you can work through one person, right?
Hmm.
And not that that person represents a community. That's not what I'm saying at all. I think that what I'm saying is that it's really interesting how within our own communities we have to find those people that have a message to share that coexist with many different people. um,
Hmm.
and I think that that's been, that project gave me the understanding of the possibilities of what you can do with indigenous communities, and also the need for, for funding, right, for really understanding how we can fund projects like the Standing Strong project, like other projects that are out there, that can, yeah, that can spread these, um, I don't like to call, let me see, let me use the right words for this, but it's kind of like this indigenous excellence. It's like being, like, for us to stop thinking that as people from across the country and across the world, that we're not worthy of these things. And the
Hmm.
Standing Strong project's trying to do that. That's a project that I worked on that allowed me to understand that the possibilities of what we can do together, but then also how much farther we have to go.
Right.
It kind of opened a lot of curiosity for me about the possibilities of many other projects too, and many other ways of telling a story. That, Web3 is coming up. He is here already, right? But it's coming up
Hmm.
soon, in the sense of going back to that question about, technology. Is Web3 is here, and how we're going to incorporate indigenous knowledge in that, how we're going to incorporate indigenous stories. That, for example, somebody can be watching this podcast, and then they can be sitting right next to us because of their VR, system, right? Um
Right.
and to me, those things are exciting from Central Project, because that project taught me that it's our place to be in there, and it's totally okay for us to be included in those spaces.
What advice would you give to aspiring artists, storytellers, and activists who are interested in using their creative talents to advocate for Indigenous rights and promote cultural revitalization?
Yeah, I think, one of the learnings that I had is that being curious about things instead of being afraid of them can really help you have a longevity of experiences when you're having a creative practice, especially as a person of color, as a person, from a community that people like to call marginalized, right? Like,
Hmm.
I don't see myself as a marginalized person, because, that's not how I see myself. But I know that there's people that think, your community
Yeah.
is lesser than. So how I see it is, that having that curiosity about the journey, it's so much more valuable than only getting to the finish line.
Hmm.
I think that, as a young storyteller, I started to start seeing how sometimes they give you a pathway to the thing, but then when you get there, it's not really what you thought it was. So
True.
I think enjoying the process, and then remembering that the teachings are in the process instead of the final product. I think that will be my big advice. And then also to make work that improves from the work previously. I want people to take these projects that I do, to take my images and my videos, and to say, I'm gonna make that and change it. I'm gonna change it up so that it can become something that it's my own. I already seen that happening with different projects, where people borrow certain things that they saw on my project, and then they go and make their own version. And I think that's really important because um, if we can change things a certain percentage, right? They
Right.
like I think Virgil Abloh, he was Virgil Abloh was a great creative himself. He passed away a few years ago, and he would talk about the 3% rule. So he would change things only 3%, right? So when they asked him to go make a new shoe for Nike, he just changed the existing Nike shoe and changed the 3% just to be able to move things faster, but then also to remember that we are working on the foundation of those that came before us and those who we will
Mhm.
follow, you know?
So has there been any piece of work that you've completed that you were surprised by the reaction it received?
Let me see. Hmm.
Or
How,
lack of reaction, I guess.
yeah.
Either way.
Yeah, I think I'll probably say the work that I did here in Portland in 2020. I was documenting the protests happening here in Portland after George Floyd was killed by the police. It was interesting because I didn't show up to those protests right away, right? So it
Mhm.
took me a while to really understand my place in the large narrative. Um, and then the way that I did it, it was I had to go to different community collectives, let's call them that were leading these protests that were I really wanted to understand my place in something that felt like I was a guest in. Again, that is the key to me personally. How it was work for me is that you understand you're a guest, and then you try to learn and listen. So
Mhm.
that when once we made, I was out there making photographs. There was I was asking, like, what is the need? Like, why do we need these things right now? Like, what do you need? They say we need art. We need to have stuff in the front when we're out there. So I was like, okay, great. So I went and printed out posters of an image, right? And then that image became a bit of the image that people were carrying around in this protest. It was around a thousand posters. Um, and it was interesting to me that you know the need of the community. I thought that the community needed photographs for like social media or something, or whatever that was. It was interesting to me that what they said was, no, we actually need art. Like that's I want to come back and be able to hold a photo of something that I feel positive about, because we're
Mhm.
going through so much grief. Um, so that was I didn't expect that. I expected it to be a bit different at that moment, and then it was not.
Hmm. So Josue, what motivates, inspires you?
Mm. I think that knowing there's things we're making right now that will affect people in the future
Mhm.
gets me going every day. And then also that obviously they will affect people now, um, but it also nods to our ancestors. So there's a bit of a circular moment there where I know for a fact one day we won't be here. I like that is the actual fact that I won't physically be here. However, the ripples of what we make, I think, will live through time, and it will also say thank you to the people that came before me. So that's what motivates me, and that's what gets me going, and going through my own transformation journey. It allows me to know that it's possible. That
Mhm.
it is possible to create something beautiful out of something that was painful. Or to go
Absolutely.
to go and make a statement about a moment, right? Like the moment we're living through right now. Whereas if there's a moment in humanity's history that we can actually push or create and imagine something that will be different for those people that will talk about us one day. Like, to me, that possibility that we still have that hope
Right.
that humans can actually coexist and really, like, love each other and love themselves, that gets me going every day.
What's next for you?
What's next for me? So right now we have this storytelling ecosystem, quote unquote, agency that we developed for the last few years. I think this continues on. I'm making more films this year. That is a big
Mhm.
part. Going to write on a script, creating, yeah, just kind of like sharing those stories that I haven't been able to share. And I might walk across America actually this year,
Wow.
um, and go and tell. We're gonna tell a very beautiful story about the state of the country, but also the state of it's almost like a pulse on where we are, everybody. Like
Mhm.
it's gonna be interesting because this work is also compassionate and yeah, it's compassionate, but I won't take shit from nobody. You know what I mean? uh, you know what I'm saying? Like it's like, and so
Yeah.
I think we'll go through some hard parts throughout the country from here to DC. So it will be a long journey. I also applied for this fellowship at Stanford University. So if that happens, that's gonna change my life for sure.
Right. Absolutely.
It will be a year of answering one question around visual storytelling. So
Hmm.
I have the question of how do we use visual storytelling to help indigenous communities heal. Um, and then if that happens, that's gonna change my life. But if it doesn't happen, I think it's still we're still doing so much that I sometimes wake up and be like, oh man, like how do I do this?
You're juggling a lot.
Yeah, and also like how do I do this? And sometimes I'm a family person, so I sometimes have to, at 5 p.m. I turn everything off, and it's like, okay, cool, nothing else exists but my kids and my wife, and that's all it really
That's
matters.
good. Right.
um so I've learned that balance of how to find a time for myself, a time for my family, and then also fulfilling your purpose on this earth.
Mhm. I mean, you work in various mediums telling your story and other stories. Is there any medium that you have not worked in yet that you want to try your hand at?
Yes, I want to create really big sculptures, and also I want to create sculptures with earth. So like earth, it's like earth-based sculpture. So we're working with the earth to shape it, and
Mhm.
then create monuments. Monuments. I mean, you know, our ancestors, build amazing structures, like in places where you go and you feel reignited. Um,
Sure. Mhm.
and that was all intentional, right? So I think that's where I'm going towards is one day being able to work with space and earth. So like shaping earth.
So before we close out, is there anything else you'd like to add and share with our listeners?
Uh, yeah, I mean it's an interesting time we're living in, and I think that, like I said earlier, finding that self love and finding compassion for ourselves, and especially for a lot of times this sounds a little cliche to people, but it's to having compassion for the inner child in us.
Mhm.
I think a lot of us, especially if we come from communities that have gone through hardship, and even people that we think don't go through hardship, there is a lot of value in listening to that inner child, to that person who was not tamed. You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
to that yeah, to that person who lives inside of us, that maybe needs to hear that they are loved, or they are cared for, or that they're safe. I think that if we can do that a little more and find compassion for the people that are dealing with a lot right now, I think that will be my message, is that by sharing our own story, we open those portals, those windows into something much bigger than ourselves. And I think that this is the time for us to share our collective story as humanity.
Our time is now.
Hmm.
Well, I'm going to let you promote yourself. Where can people find your work and you?
Yes. So my website is josuerivas.io, and my Instagram is josue_foto. And we have a ecosystem called Indigena, Indigena, And you can also find us on Instagram on that handle. And yeah, we're looking forward to whoever listens to this to reach out and to share out into the world, so we can continue to hopefully tell beautiful stories like you do. I listened to some of your podcasts. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you. Well, we appreciate your time today, and thank you, my friend, for coming on the show, and much more success to you moving forward and telling your story and other stories. They need to be heard and people need to listen.
Thank you so much.
We'll talk soon. Okay.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through Indigenous art and creativity. Stay inspired and keep exploring with us on Beyond the Art.
Remember to subscribe and follow us for more exclusive interviews, insightful discussions, and stories that ignite your artistic imagination.
Until next time, continue to unlock your limitless potential with Beyond the Art. Thank you for listening.